Thanks for watching. My name's Glenn Morgan, and this is We the Governed. Today we're going to be talking about some stuff that's going on in Washington State. It's making national news, and specifically I'm going to start out with how the Tumwater School Board just a few days ago decided to take a vote 3-1 on their school board in opposition to having trans boys basically playing girls' sports. Now, this is a big deal. It made national news. And I think it's a bigger deal than people realize, primarily because of who Washington State's statewide superintendent of public instruction, basically Chris Reykdal here, who has been pandering to the trans lobby this entire time that he's been in office over the last few years. It's really a much more significant issue that the Tumwater School District, of all school districts, has done this, because this is basically Chris Reykdal's school district, and he was on the school board there. There's a lot to talk about here. Let's dive right into it. But before I do, just want to remind you, if you have not hit the subscribe or the like button down below and you like this video and you want to subscribe to my channel, please feel free to do so. Do it as soon as possible. Also, feel free to share these videos with others, because you never know who might be inspired to make a difference in their community just by some of the content that I hope that I'm putting out. So let's just dive right back into it. So the context of the Tumwater School District and the decision that they recently made to not allow trans kids in their girls athletic program, this is kind of a big deal, and it really does affect Chris Reykdal directly and personally. This is a much more significant thing, because as we know, there's been a number of school districts that have already taken votes like this all around Washington State. You got about 295 school districts in our state. Meade High School did this just a few months ago. You had recently Moses Lake School District. There's probably a few others as well. But those are Eastern Washington school districts, and Tumwater is located right next to the state capitol in Olympia. So this is right in Thurston County. It's not far away from where I live, and I have a bit of connection to this school district as well, but not as much as Chris Reykdal, because after all, he's actually a former school board member from Tumwater. That is where he got his political start. Even though he did teach high school down in Longview for a while, most of his basically adult life has been spent up in the Tumwater area, and he was on the school board. That's where he was when he decided to first run for the state legislature in 2010, when he got elected to the 22nd legislative district as a legislator in Olympia. So Chris Reykdal was on the school board. It's kind of a big deal. In addition, his wife was actually a counselor in Tumwater. She also served on the school board later, before Chris Reykdal was elected to OSPI. And then once he got into that position, of course, he found a nice six-figure job for her to jump into there, because who says nepotism is dead in Washington State? It's very much alive. And Chris Reykdal figured, why not? We're going to have two six-figure salaries, and let's just bring them on, since I'm running the state's, since I'm the superintendent of the public instruction for the state of Washington, I should hire my wife here as well, which is what he did. But on top of that, both of his boys, both Kennedy and Carter, they graduated from the Tumwater School District as well. So this is a school district that, to make this decision right now, is a pretty significant confrontation to Chris Reykdal, because Chris Reykdal is the superintendent of public instruction who came right out of the school district, who's had his kids there, who graduated. His wife taught there. I mean, this is really quite the tie-in to Tumwater, and in some ways, that's why this has made national news and has a bigger impact internally in Washington State than it might at first appear. Now, this whole origin of this drama in Tumwater really goes back to a situation with the Tumwater, basically girls basketball team, where just a few weeks ago, several girls on the Tumwater basketball team refused to play against boys on the Shelton basketball team at a basketball meet at Tumwater. And so Brandy Cruz actually has done a really good job in this. I've featured just a snapshot of her video. That's a thumbnail of one of her videos. And she actually interviewed both the boy who was playing for Shelton, who said he was a girl, so he could play on the girls' Shelton squad. And also she interviewed the girl from Tumwater here, who was the person who basically refused to play against the boy from Shelton. Now, this has been making national news. Riley Gaines has made a lot of attention on this. I talked to her when she was out in Seattle last time. It was quite, this has been making a lot of drama, right? Just the fact that girls' sports are under attack and boys are able to say that they're going to be girls and they can go and get all the advantage, the biological advantage of being a boy, and jump into those girls' sports and, of course, hurt girls in those sports, or at least prevent them from getting awards. It's making national news, and I don't know, for whatever reason, the Democrats have decided that this, of all hills, is the primary hill they're going to define their party on and keep pushing forward on in an effort to destroy girls' sports. Now, I'm particularly interested in the Tumwater story because my daughter graduated from Tumwater last year. My daughter was the speaker at their graduation. She was one of the senior speakers at the graduation, and she was a valedictorian there before she went to the Air Force Academy. I also have several nephews who have graduated or are graduating from there right now, and I've had several exchange students who have attended the Tumwater School District. Tumwater's actually a really good school. I mean, by public school standards, I think it's actually a pretty good school district, and this is a fairly big deal right now, the story, and putting Tumwater in the map for something that they absolutely probably don't want to be on the map for. Now, basically Reykdal's just put himself out there in the news on this issue by basically completely declaring war on girls' sports. If there's one person clearly unconcerned about what damage is being done to girls in Washington State, it's definitely Chris Reykdal. And he seems to be quite proud of that fact. This is an issue that is probably fairly clear there are solutions. And really what happened with the Tumwater School District is they're looking at the Washington Intercollegiate Athletic Association, which is also considering a couple of proposals to try to find solutions for mostly really the only issue that tends to come up are boys who want to play in girls' sports, and then trying to find some kind of either a different category for them or just requiring them to play with other boys when they're basically going to be competing in athletics. Now, the big question that's come out from parents all over Washington State is it possible for us to protect our girls from guys like these? Chris Reykdal, who's the Superintendent of Public Instruction. You have our Governor, Bob Ferguson, who's decided to also be involved in this issue. And, of course, Nick Brown, guy on the right here on this slide, who is the new Attorney General for Washington State. So he's the one leading the charge with lawsuits against the Trump administration, basically demanding that boys be allowed to play against girls in sports. So it's kind of come up with it's quite a bit of drama, and the political leadership in Washington State on the Democrat Party side clearly is whole. They have thrown everything in. This is an all-in game for them, and the question does come up: can we trust our girls around these guys? Now, a lot of the issue is really, in my opinion, why they're reacting so significantly on this is really a Trump derangement syndrome kind of thing. They're so bitter, they're so angry, they're so upset about this guy being back in D.C. that all rational thought is kind of just abandoned, he had just disappeared entirely. And so their actions have very little to do with any logic or reason. It's just this emotional reaction to the fact that this guy is back in D.C. And then, of course, you also have our Senate leader here, Jamie Peterson is from Seattle. He lives in a bubble. He has very little contact with normal people. And unfortunately, when you get in this elitist kind of bubble, you don't even understand how what you're saying is actually perceived by the rest of the world and the rest of the state in this case. And Jamie Peterson was, of course, on the news, got the attention basically nationwide, coming out and saying that parents just don't have a right to know the things that we may want to do to their kids when they're at school, including medical procedures and other things. We can keep it secret from those parents. Jamie Peterson here, he thinks that's great and wonderful, and he's enthusiastic about it. So put yourself now in Bob Ferguson's shoes. Newly elected Attorney General, what are the issues that he's going to have to face? This being one of them, but he's got a couple of things on his plate, and it's not exactly the governor's, the experience in the governor's mansion he wanted to have his first couple months. Because namely, there's a Title IX lawsuit discriminating against women that's being filed. It was filed against Tumwater for allowing the competition to occur at their school district. I really think it should probably be against Shelton, considering the circumstances. But nevertheless, there's at least one federal case going. There's probably going to be multiple more. And Bob Ferguson knows that they're going to have to devote state resources, because at the same time, he's also trying to attack the Trump administration for not letting him allow boys to play against girls in girl sports. So this is going to be part of the defining characteristic of Bob Ferguson's governorship. In addition, there's obviously a lot of money being cut off in the federal government in the DOGE effort, the Department of Government Efficiency, just trying to identify the grant grifting operations, many of which do flow into Washington State, and cutting off and downsizing some of just the incompetent waste, bloat, and fraud of our federal government. And inevitably, that's clearly affecting Washington State. There's a lot of money that won't be flowing into Washington State. Some of it probably is just a temporary cutoff while they audit a few of these grants and some of these projects, but some of it's definitely going to go away for good, especially the U.S. AID type kickback schemes that were probably flowing more into leftist organizations in Seattle. I don't think that money's coming back. And that's something that Ferguson has to deal with. He also is inevitably going to have to deal with a variety of other civil rights lawsuits that are almost certainly going to be coming his way. They're probably going to be oriented around First Amendment violations, because nobody likes censorship more than Bob Ferguson. He has set up a special task force to silence people like me and others in our state who dare to actually stand up or expose corruption and bad behavior in government. He is adamantly, it's one of the weirdest angles I've seen, but this is something he's gone down the rabbit trail all the way on censorship. And on top of that, he also has been very abusive in Second Amendment cases, a variety of which it's not clear how many of the new ones are going to even get through the legislature this cycle, but there's a history of them, and he has decided to get fully behind that. And based on Supreme Court rulings that we've had and likely civil rights actions that will come against Washington, Trump, then I think Ferguson gets to deal with that. Finally, I still think the most significant thing, the linchpin of all of the inevitable Department of Justice litigations that will be coming to Washington, will be ultimately the Department of Licensing issue, which I've addressed in several other videos, and the illegal voter registration scheme that essentially covers up, and inevitably the federal reform for election reform that's going to basically be a direct result of that investigation. Washington State isn't the only one doing that, but Washington State will end up being one of the exhibits in that inevitable federal election reform movement that's going on. So now you got to put yourself in Chris Reykdal's shoes. What is he dealing with? Well, number one, the biggest thing is that Chris Reykdal is best known for convincing 47,000 families to pull their kids out of public school over the last few years. Nobody has done a better job to diminish the impact of public school and convince so many parents to homeschool or to send their kids to private school, but whatever they do, get them away from anything associated with Chris Reykdal. What's interesting is there's a perception, I think, among some people, maybe many watching this channel, that a lot of these are more traditional parents at home that are pulling their kids out because of political reasons or religious reasons. And I'm sure that fits the profile of some of them. But the majority of the kids actually that have been pulled out of the school system are really coming out of Bellevue, Seattle, and these other places where the school system is just egregiously failing, destroying their highly capable programs. And essentially, you do have a high concentration of fairly wealthy families up there who want their kids to actually be literate, understand math, and be able to read. And that's not a high priority for Chris Reykdal. And so their parents are the ones who are largely pulling a lot of their kids out and sending them to private school of various kinds or homeschooling up there. In addition, Reykdal is really becoming legendary in the education world for just being so effective at destroying all standards and collapsing learning and basically producing horrible results, far worse results, and spending a lot more money than anybody ever has in the history of Washington State education. And so that's usually that wouldn't be considered very positive. On top of that, Reykdal went through this weird 2-3 year window during COVID where he was basically just threatening and attacking school districts, threatening to pull funding, not allowing any kind of local control over education of any kind, because what he was trying to do is force those school districts to enforce abusive mask mandates, remote learning that was falling apart and ensuring the kids learn nothing, and this demanding, abusive approach that he took to dealing with those school districts is kind of ironic, considering right now he's complaining about the feds pulling funding from him when he just spent 3 years abusing every school district in the state that he could get his hands on, threatening them with personal litigation against the school board members. It was really bizarre. I've never seen anything like it in the state of Washington before, and I don't think it's ever happened like this before, and Chris Reykdal was the poster child for that. And on top of that, nobody's been a bigger puppet for the teachers union than Chris Reykdal, who was a member of the teachers union, just like his wife, and he was heavily engaged and involved with the Washington Education Association, the WEA. Basically, those guys have been controlling Chris Reykdal for quite some time, and anything they want, he gives them. Money, power, control, abuse, anything that they want, Chris Reykdal's been shoveling their way. And with that kind of a resume, it's generally not the thing that the average person in Washington State really wants to see. And so it makes many of us out there in the state ask the simple question, can't we do better than these clowns? It's a good question to ask. There is a reason why Chris Reykdal decided that he doesn't want to have to run again for office. He would prefer it to be an appointed position. But that's going to take a little bit more work than what he has going his way right now. Now, the other thing, of course, many parents with the recent publicity of the attacks on girls' sports in our state and the clear awareness that there's no adults out there protecting them in the school system, they're getting concerned about their kids. And of course, many parents are saying, listen, I'm not going to let these weirdos in government or the school system right now hurt my little girl, right? I want her to have an opportunity to actually be able to experience girls' sports without getting beat up by boys, or perhaps just learning how to read and write. And is that just too high a bar to set for the modern public education system? It's a great question. Now, one thing I always have to say is that it is always a mistake, in my opinion, if you're a parent. My kids have gone through public school. My youngest two are graduating this year. But I'll tell you, it wasn't like a hands-off operation. You're involved, and I think it's helpful if you're involved with your kids' education and making sure you pay attention to what they're learning, at least providing advice to them and suggestions to them. I think you're going to have a little bit better outcome. Doesn't matter if they're in a private school or public school. If you're a complete hands-off parent not paying any attention, I don't think the outcome's going to be as good. So number one, I think it's much better just to always be involved and engaged with it. But ultimately, this also comes back to a theme that I suspect is going to become more common for us moving forward as activists in Washington State and people who care about liberty and freedom and want to actually reform government. It's probably time to start cutting, because when we see some of these goofballs in government and the decisions that they make and how they squander our money, most of us are thinking maybe it's time to start cutting. And well, the Department of Government Efficiency exists only in D.C. There is a version of it here in Washington State that you can all be part of, and I'll probably talk about that in my next video. But the quick thing I want to remind you is that what's going on out there in the state right now, you can't just sit back and pop your popcorn and just watch the chaos unfold. I mean, I guess you could, but you aren't going to make a difference if you do that. If you want to make a difference, you got to be involved. You have to be willing to show up because, as I always say, the future belongs to those who show up.